I guess the most controversial stand which libertarians have now is on drugs. You probably get a lot of criticism because you want to legalize drugs, right?
Well, but I think the most controversial thing about the whole drug problem is zero tolerance. I think that's what's controversial, this idea that we have no privacy. There's no financial privacy or privacy in our home because the Drug Enforcement Agency can break our doors down looking for a cigarette butt. They confiscate cars and boats, and houses are bulldozed down, all in the name of teaching people not to have bad habits. They're spending $10 billion. I think it's an incredible program of failure. So the controversy is really in the hands of the government, Democrats and Republicans, who are saying the same thing, and each party tries to outdo the other, and they're absolutely obsessed with this. At the same time, they care not a lit about, our civil liberties. But the drug laws have only been here since 1914. About that time we had the income tax, the Federal Reserve System, the FBI, licensing to protect certain industries and professions. Then we decided we were going to tell people how to live and what their habits ought to be. That's when they introduced the ideas of prohibition of alcohol. Didn't work very well, and so that was finally repealed. Libertarians detest drug dealers. And that's one reason why we want to get rid of the laws. We want to get the drug dealer out of business overnight because he can't exist unless the drug price is very high. So a lot of good people inadvertently are the allies of the drug dealers if they like the drug laws. The people who write those laws and like those laws inadvertently promote crime. Every drug addict, because he has to pay these exorbitant amounts for their drugs, commit on the average 260 felonies a year to raise the money. That would be totally unnecessary. Who raises that kind of money to go buy a six-pack at the drugstore? They don't have to do that because the alcohol is available. And alcohol kills more people than drugs. Cigarettes, they kill 325,000 people a year. And what are we required to do? Subsidize the tobacco industry. I mean, if people want to really do good, let's just quit subsidizing tobacco, get the government out of the sale of alcohol, and go that way. But the crime rate would go down, the drug dealers would be out of business. I think the kids wouldn't be as exposed either. It's pretty hard to tell a kid that's just dropped out of a public school where he was totally bored and he's on the street corner and he decides he wants a job and buy a car. Talk him into working at McDonald's for $4 an hour when he can make $400 a day doing a little work for the local drug merchant. There's no way. He's tempted and he yields to the temptation. So we literally set the stage by these drug laws to get more kids involved, and I think that's horrible. I think the kids they certainly deserve some protection. We deserve at least to create an environment where they're not so likely to be forced into the drug trade.
Now, you're a medical doctor, and you think that legalizing all these drugs would be good. Do your medical colleagues and the medical profession, they agree with this?
No, to a minority. Matter of fact, I think that even drugs for treating oneself should be more readily available to people. Not that I think people should do it unwisely and use a lot of fancy medication without some advice, but if drugs were more available, if a nurse could prescribe penicillin, it certainly would be a lot cheaper. Nurses are capable of telling you whether you have a strep throat or not. It would drive the cost down. So doctors have a little protectionism involved. They like their little monopoly. So the AMA, matter of fact, the AMA lobbied me in Washington to vote against even allowing doctors to give heroin for dying cancer patients who couldn't have their pain relieved from morphine. But they did not want this to happen because they wanted to have control, and they didn't want to look like they were soft on drugs, but they want control. So whether it's the drugs necessary right now, the FDA, I think, does a horrible disservice to us all by making it very difficult for AIDS and cancer patients to do alternative treatments. Yeah. They're smuggling drugs from Mexico. We think of Mexico as a socialist state, and yet they can get drugs more readily there. And we're having dying cancer patients, AIDS patients, smuggling drugs up into the free United States in order for them to take this medicine. But the FDA argues, well, we got to make sure it's safe and effective. Well, if somebody's dying, don't you think they have the right to take a chance on a drug, an experimental drug? But the AMA isn't helpful in here, and the medical profession is very poor. A lot of doctors would agree with me, but I think they like the idea that they're sort of godlike and they get to write prescriptions, and they certainly think that opening up this whole barrel, so to speak, would be detrimental to their protection, and they're interested in organized medicine.
What about the police and law enforcement profession? Would they be for your point of view? It would put a lot of them out of work.
I think a lot of them would make a lot less money. You know, their system has been corrupted by it.
Oh gosh, it's terrible.
It's you know, another example of how foolish some of these laws are is the prisons are running rampant with drugs. If we can't keep drugs out of the prison, how are we going to keep drugs off the street? Which means it's very much a corrupting influence. I mean, we read stories. I'm sure the majority of the police are not involved, but you don't need very many to really make a lot of money off it. So there are going to be some officials who would agree with us, and I've had some. There was an interesting story of an individual when my staff went to work for a candidate who was running for a governorship in a large city, and they brought all the district attorneys together because crime was the #1 issue in that state. And they said that the only way you could ever get rid of crime would be, and they all agreed on this, is you'd have to get rid of the drug law. So behind closed door, without the press, they agreed the drug laws created crime. And you know what they said? You can't ever achieve that because there are too many people on the take, too many judges and too many policemen like this. So just forget about it. We can't deal with it, and it's too much of an emotional issue anyway. But it is an important issue. I think the discussion has progressed a whole lot in the last 6 months. I think we as libertarians have done a whole lot of good in getting this discussion out, and I am going to continue to debate this because as a parent of 5 children and as a physician and as a non-drug user, I think that I have some credibility in making this debate on the idea that drugs ought to be decriminalized.